All right, welcome everyone to this final invited speaker session. Today is an honor to have with us Dr. David Spivak. I will give let's say, official introduction of him, and then I will give you an unofficial one because it's very, very cool to have him over. So for the ones of you that don't know, David leads the Collective Intelligence Research Group at Topos Institute, an institute he co-founded with some other researchers. And he has spent actually a decade here as a researcher at MIT. He got his PhD from UC Berkeley in 2007. And in his career, he worked on various aspects of bringing category theory ideas into science, technology, and society, with applications ranging from material science to robotics, aeronautics, and computer science. So this is kind of the official bio that everybody would give. But now I want to mention three things that are special, I think, about David. First of all, David is the reason why this class exists, or why I started studying category theory. I started reading his book together with Brendan Fong, and he opened the world to me. I think I mentioned that often in the class, and I actually quoted David many times in this class. And what really changed in a way, my career, my life, was coming here to MIT and working with him during the IAP class in 2020. So that was a great experience for me, and somehow I tried to bring that experience to you guys during this class. The second thing I want to mention about David is that you will see he finds always very good and elegant frameworks to think about problems. But what is impressive to me is that he always also finds applications, right? He can work on very theoretical topics, but then he has a collaboration with, I don't know, the Air Force, or he is able to help writing software to design new materials. And having these strong technical abilities, but also being able to translate into practice, that's something I really try to emulate in my research, and I'm very excited to have him here today so that you can see this. And the final thing is, David develops things that us engineers or common mortal people will chew on for the next decade. One example is co-design, right? Co-design is a small chapter in a book he wrote, and now we have an entire group of people working on co-design ideas probably for the next, I don't know how many years, I hope many years. Similar ideas go for databases, for this thing he developed called Poly, and actually the new thing he's working on, which is what he's talking about today, and this gives me the hook to introduce the talk. Today, David will introduce this concept of plausible fiction, tending actualizes potential. This is kind of a crazy thing. If you look at David's trajectory, I don't know where I would place this, but he wants to teach us more about this, but also he wants to have some feedback. So let's make it this very interactive. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more and discover more connections. So without further ado, David, thank you again for coming. The stage is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Joella, for the very generous introduction. And I just want to just quickly note that it was Andrea Censi who invented co-design. But other than that, I really appreciate everything you said. And the thing that ties it together for me, I think it's is like I just want to know whether we can use math to understand ourselves or to know what to do, basically. So this talk, some of you have seen it before. I asked Joella if he would just invite people to watch it ahead of time so that it's not a surprise, because it's such a different talk. It's very, in some sense, very ambitious because it's kind of very broad and sweeping. And in another sense, it feels to me pretty vulnerable because it's like, I don't really know what there's not a lot of math backing this up. This is like my attempt to find, why do self-fulfilling prophecies work? What is one, or how does language even work? Why when we say, please pass the salt, why do 10 to the 25 atoms move through space? How did that get set up? And so kind of like, what's going on here? And so for me, I've found category theory because I wanted to understand what even to do in this world. You have certain talents and there are certain needs in the world, and things are getting, you don't really know where you stand or how things are going to be, and you're supposed to figure out that stuff. And so what should you do? And I thought maybe math could help because it's the most stable thing we have. And that's kind of how I got to everything Joella was talking about in the intro, and also and now to this talk. So I would love to hear your thoughts on things. I'm not trying to tell you what's true. I'm trying to ask, does this make sense? Can we go forward from here? Because if this is not mathematical yet, there's some mathematical ideas in it. But if it's not good, then the math won't work anyway, is what I've found. If it's not a good idea, then I won't be able to fit math to it. But if it is the right intuition, then like I can fit math to it, and the math can guide the intuition, and the intuition can guide the math, and back and forth. So I'm actually trying to work with you guys, as brilliant engineers, and trying to. He called me brilliant, so I get to call you brilliant. So brilliant engineers who can poke holes in things, but not in an aggressive way, but just to like try to help make it better. So that's kind of my intention for this talk. I gave it originally at IPAM, which is the Institute for Pure and Applied Math at UCLA, about maybe a month ago. So, okay, so plausible fiction, tending actualizes potential. Well, does it? Let's find out. Let's see if we agree with that. Okay. So I'm just going to jump right into what I mean by plausible fiction. If someone has a comment, just start talking, or maybe Joella can like interrupt me or whatever. So what is plausible fiction? I'm just defining it to consist of these 4 rules and 1 mechanism. So the rules are, it starts with the present moment right now, as it is, with minimal distortion. The plausible fiction ends with a future that whoever's writing it sees as good, or at least an open future. Like it's not, the world is destroyed and there's nothing left or something. There's something open about it. And as for scope, people were asking me in the previous thing, what's the scope of this? And it's anything from, let's make this talk good, so very small scope, to large scope. It's supposed to be, one thing I like about category theory is it's scale free in a lot of ways. And so this talk is also kind of scale free, whatever scale, which doesn't mean you have to focus on all scales at once. It means you can jump to whatever scale makes sense to you, and whatever scale you're trying to investigate, and see if the claims make sense there. So your plausible fiction about, can I get that salt passed? Or your plausible fiction of, can I make climate change better? Should end with a future that you see as good. And it should be plausible the whole way. Like, given how physics works, given how society works, you can't just say, we should elect better leaders, or we should change the culture, if you don't know how to do that. That's not an easy thing. So given how things work, what can we actually consider plausible? And fourthly, it should be mimetically fit, meaning that it should be easy for collaborators, people you would need to help you, to understand and share. If they can't understand the idea, then there's no point. And the mechanism is that you collaborate by filling gaps. If you hear my plausible fiction of today's talk, that maybe plausible fiction will help or something. So it's kind of a bit circular in that way. You don't have to focus on the circularity, focus on any place you want. But if you hear this thing and you're like, wow, that's interesting, I'm interested in this, I would like to help, but there's this part over here that seems unclear, then that's where you can fill gaps in the story. You can make your own plausible fiction for how that gap gets filled. So it's kind of like a stepping stone analogy. So if you need to cross a river, you could throw in a big, large, stable stone halfway through. And now people who have, half the leap can make the jump, but still there's a lot of people who can't make the jump. So they fill in more stones and more stones. And eventually there's just a nice little path for people to cross. And so once you make it crossable, people will cross if they want, if that's interesting to them. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling thing, because if it's sufficiently plausible, which is number 3, and it's sufficiently appealing, which is number 2, that it's good, then it should happen. If it doesn't happen, then either people didn't get it, which means it wasn't mimetically fit, or it wasn't plausible, or it wasn't appealing. So that's the idea. And the
one question.
Yeah.
Do you consider conflicts in this concept? For example, one step or one form of society, one fiction might be good for some people, but bad for someone else. So their interest conflict, and we have to evaluate how they can affect this fiction, and how, like, is this a fiction plausible for everyone in the world, or is this
that's a great point
in some sense?
This is meant to, in some sense, describe what's already happening. So already people are competing for what's going to happen. And some people say there's going to be a new currency, BRICS, the BRICS currency, and that's their plausible fiction. And some people say, no, it's going to be the US currency forever or something. Let's say, so what I've often thought about is there's these billionaires who are creating bunkers, And it seems like they're thinking that maybe everything will go to hell and the world will be a terrible place, but they'll be fine in their bunkers. And that's their plausible fiction. But if we make plausible fiction that says, yeah, but probably the people who make your bunkers will make a backdoor for themselves to enter. Well, now their plausible fiction has a hole in it. And if we can make it clear that that fiction won't work, and we can tell why it won't work, then they can't rely on a bad situation for us. So that's kind of how I see it. If you see someone making a bad plausible fiction, one that's bad for you, then you can create plausible fictions that take their storyline away and show that that storyline is that you have a more plausible storyline than they do. And that's all. And this fight for the future is one we're already having. This is not like trying to invent something that isn't already here. But did that answer your question? Did that make sense?
So from what I'm understanding, what you said is that you believe there's a plausible fiction that is plausible for everyone. We just want to compete to reach that plausible fiction.
It's that everyone tells their own story. If somebody says the world will eventually be an AI and humans will no longer be in it or something like that, that's their fiction, and they might work towards that. Or somebody else tells a different fiction. But do you think which one's plausible? Which one is going to work? Which one do you want to work for? And people can enter the story anywhere they want and start moving the fiction in a direction that they think is better. And if you make a world that's just good for you in your plausible fiction, then no one's going to want to join in. But if you make a world that's better for everyone and that's plausible, then everyone's going to want to join in. And so that's going to be the one that wins. At least that's what I'm supposing here.
Okay,
I think if I can comment, I think what helps ruling those cases that you have in mind, the conflicting cases, is the self-fulfilling thing, right? If there are too many conflicts, there's not going to be a self-fulfilling property, probably, right? Because
that's right. If to make my fiction work, I have to hurt a lot of people, then all those people are going to be working against me, and they're going to maybe be able to overcome me. And it's true that, bad people can use this, whatever you mean by bad and whatever you mean by good. And that's kind of what I'm going to get to next is what is it that actually makes these things work? So I really appreciate that question. I think I would like to move on, but also I'd like to re-invite you to ask the question later, or anyone else to ask the question later as we see a little bit further down the talk. But I think that's exactly the right question in some sense. Like that's one of the most important questions of this thing. I'm, again, not trying to propose something that is radically new. I'm trying to propose what's already happening. So when I say I'd like to move on, well, you don't have to let me. You could interrupt again. But I think I might be able to if enough people see that as a good direction. So the plausible fiction is that, or an analogy I want to make is that plausible fiction is kind of like an attempt to prove a conjectured theorem. You conjectured that the world can be good. And it would be good if we could prove that theorem. So can you prove that the world will be good? So these are the conjectures. And the gap filling is basically taking a theorem, which is the world can be good, and factoring it into smaller pieces. Well, the world, if people care, the world can be good is kind of a big one. But let's say we can fix climate change. So my plausible fiction is, well, we're going to sequester carbon in this way. We're going to sequester carbon and we're going to, and that's it. And then, okay, well then how do you prove that we can sequester carbon? That's the next gap. And so you kind of keep proving that down and down, or you say the gap is, yeah, well, if you sequester carbon, is that really going to be enough to prevent, to reduce climate change? And that's a thing you can prove. So you can fill in that gap. So the fiction coming true corresponds to the conjecture being proven. If it's simple enough, like I'm going to, we're going to have a good talk, or we're going to have a good discussion, we're going to pass the SALT, then we're probably going to be able to prove that the conjecture that the SALT can be passed. Whereas if it's something like we can solve climate change, that's a tougher conjecture, but it's one we still want to prove. This thing's in the way. Is this in the way for you guys?
No.
Okay, I'm moving a little Zoom thing here. Okay, what would we write plausible fiction about? Well, we'd do whatever we care about. What are you going to spend your time on? You're spending your time in this classroom right now because there's something about it you care about. You don't have to be there. So why do we do things? I think that what actually gets things done, and again, these are all open for your questions and debate, and what actually gets things done is care. So when I say care, there are words like matters. If somebody say that, what really matters? Or some people say, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Useful is a care word. Matters is a care word. Important or worry or problem, want, value. If someone says values are what matters, your values, that's a care word. You can't value something if you don't care. You can't really want something if you don't care. There can't really be a problem if you don't care. Like, what's the problem? How could it matter? So a guy named Robert Pirsig wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a philosophy book, where he asked the question, what is quality? He wants his students to write quality essays, but they're not very high quality. And what he realizes in the end is that what makes the students write actual quality essays is when inside they care. When they actually care about it, that's where the quality comes from. And Martin Heidegger said that the being of design, the being of ourselves, our very being, is disclosed or revealed to us as care. The deepest aspects of ourselves is our care. So you don't have to believe those things, but care is clearly a word that matters, and that it's a word like, what do we care about here? Now this tends to is a bit of a pun. So I think care, how do we tend to accomplish stuff? If you think about how you got to MIT, how you do anything, the accomplishment tends to happen because you cared. Like that caring tends to work. But I really meant it more the other way. Like, it tends in order to. How does care work? Like, what actually happens when you care about something? You tend to it. You look at the problem set and you actually think about it. You pay attention. If you tend to garden, or you tend to a baby or something like that, if you care about a baby or a garden or dinner or whatever, you tend to it. You think about it. You stay in touch with it. You taste the food as you go. And that caring is what actually keeps you in touch with the subject matter, and what actually accomplishes making that thing work out the way you want. So to care is to attend, that has the same root, or to pay attention. We tend in order to actualize a potential. So when I say tends to, I really mean care tends in order to actualize potential. So what is actualize? It means like what is actually here, what's real. So when someone says actions speak louder than words, they're talking about what's actual. When you actually do something, that's better than just talking about it. And so self-actualization, in the sense of Maslow is like becoming all you can be, reaching your potential. Actualize just means making it true or real. And potential, well, I don't know what that is. So that's the big mystery for me. Like, what is potential? If you care about a dying person and you say, well, they have the potential to have a good end of life, or I have the potential to show love, or something like that, what is that potential? And I'm a little bit punning on the word potential here because it has a physics meaning too, that I feel like should be the same. But when it comes to the dying person, they don't really have potential to help you. They don't have potential to do anything. They're about to die. So like, when you care, and I say that person has the potential for a good end of life, and that's why I'm doing it for them, it's a little bit questionable whether that's the same sort of potential I'm talking about later. But what I'm really talking about is this possibility. What could become, what could be potent, it could be a life memory for you to remember this person always in the way that you help them. And that way you know that love is a real thing, and that the world matters or something. That might be why somebody does it. So when you talk about this baby, they have so much potential, your baby, or this genius kid from India, I'm later going to be talking about Ramanujan, or this algorithm that you've invented, or this engineering, or this design, or this experience you're having, has potential. And that's what, actualizing that potential is what matters. They really want the baby to be all it can be. So when somebody says, what could be? If only we could get fusion up and running, what could be? That's the potential of fusion. And that's what we care about. That's what people put their care into. I think I'm going very slow. So do feel free to interrupt. I think many of you have seen this talk before, so I'm just trying to make sure that I'm open to discussion and questions.
Yeah, Dave, one question. Here.
Yeah.
I guess, well, a couple of things. Maybe a little bit more discussion later, but one thing I'm curious about is if you thought about this as kind of like a, almost like a, well, first of all, it seems very moral to me, right? There's a lot of like sort of embedded ethics in this, sort of like the word ought that you use, I think kind of, that comes from care, right? So there's something interesting there that I think is being hinted at. I'm not sure what exactly we think of that yet, but then there's kind of also an entropy almost here, right? Of like, if enough people care and it's plausible, right? Then we'll sort of tend to actualize that plausible potential, right? So, and maybe, yeah, I'm wondering if you've thought about it sort of as in any way entropic kind of way, or is that kind of stretching it too far?
My physics is not where it should be, so I don't understand how neg entropy gets concentrated into individual, into bodies. I don't understand. When I think of entropy, I think of Shannon entropy. So I think I'm a little bit behind where you would need me to be to understand that question.
I think I'm also using it pretty loosely though, honestly.
Okay.
I think I'm just thinking of like, is there like, if we kind of let the world play out, will we just see more plausible fictions being realized over time? Like, is that just the inevitable nature of this tending?
Yes, I think that is what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to invent some process as much as refine what it is that we're already seeing all around us. So yeah, that's right. I think in some sense, there's some symmetry breaking of like how we got to this specific present instead of a different one. But then a lot of the different presents kind of come back together through what's actually plausible from here. In some sense, it feels like we're just rolling down a hill, but you might get stuck on a tree, and I don't want to get stuck on a bad tree on my way to the future we're going towards. So I want to, like, there's a ball rolling down a hill, and I don't want it to get stuck in a local min. And if we make good potential, if we, like a siphon, so you know what a siphon is, you kind of put suction on one end of the siphon and it pulls water over. And by doing that, then the water just flows freely. So you have to put energy in the beginning to like make the plausible fiction. But once you do and you get over the hump, then it just starts to go freely. And maybe that's what you meant by entropically.
Yeah, I think so.
So when I say,
So,
yes.
David, sorry, I know you are
Yeah.
going slow, but there is a question from Vincent. Let's see if it's something you manage to push to later in the talk, or we have to get it done now. Go ahead, Vincent.
Oh, yes. No, I find this so interesting because it ties a lot of things together. And I was wondering whether what you mean by care, it's almost like a willingness to sacrifice for something. So when you care about X, you're willing to sacrifice Y.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, certainly you're willing to give your time and give yourself to it. I think, like, I've never had a baby as a woman, but I think that my understanding is that they fully give themselves to their baby in a way that that's hard to know before that happens to someone else. But sacrifice, I think, is very interesting. It's a word that I don't really know how to use because it sounds like you're losing something you care about also, and it sounds like you're like pitting one care against another. So I'm not sure, but I definitely agree that, like, at least the way Heidegger uses care, he says that there's this existential part of care, which is that, like, your future, yourself is like put into the plausible fiction. You like have to use your actual precious time to get this thing accomplished. You can't just be watching TikTok while you care for the baby, or you're not going to like really care for them, right? There's some attention that's needed, and that's not really necessarily a sacrifice, because if you actually care, then you throw yourself into it from a very deep place.
No, that's right. And it's sort of, the power of the sort of care that people have. In a sense, you're sacrificing that time spent on TikTok, which sounds really asinine. But for example, if someone maybe doesn't have a baby, they might be more likely to waste their time on TikTok because they don't have something which they care more about to sacrifice that time towards.
That's right.
And
if they have a hard time finding what they deeply care about, because that's not taught in school, no one teaches you hey, you want to take like 5 minutes and think about what you actually care about? No one gives you that 5 minutes, which is sad. And so I think like as humanity we're reaching, it feels like some sort of tipping point with respect to what kind of future we're going to have. And I think what I'm trying to do in this talk is emphasize that what's actually going on that's making the future come about is care. I think care plus intelligent, like care is part of power. Care matters and intelligence matters. And everyone's focusing on the intelligence part. And I just wanted to focus on the care part because I think that's part of the equation also. Where we aim the AIs is going to matter. And what kind of technology we make is going to matter. And that's going to come from care.
Yes. No, there's so many more directions I can go, but
yeah. I mean, we have an hour and a half, I guess, or an hour more, but and I'm available. I mean, I have more time than just that hour and a half. I don't know if Joella does or if you guys do, but it's a very long time. So I really appreciate your time anyway.
We care about this, so we have time.
Okay. So to
Thank
count
you.
on something means that you trust it or rely on it. In this talk, all you can really count on is that the math is accurate, and everything else, if you think if it's helping you, Vincent said that he thought this was tying things together or something, then you can count on your own thoughts about it. But all I'm asking you to count on is the math. Everything else is just very speculative and an attempt, right? There are puns all over the place, like tending to what, the care tends to actualize potential. When I do that, I'm not trying to, I'm asking, you're invited to think of either side of the pun. I'm trying to use puns very intentionally. So like they're a variable that you can pick which side you want to think about, and the variable should hold, the statement should hold up. And again, if something's labeled as a fiction, it's certainly being labeled as a proposal, not a certainty. But like, what can we count on? Math we can count on. You can count on math. I think that's probably where this phrase count on comes from. It's reliable. It's the reason I've always liked math since a young kid was because I couldn't very much rely on the real world to be what I was expecting. Or even parents, like to understand me. But if I said things mathematically, then I knew they would understand. And so it provides this accounting system, and I think the word count is a root there, that we can depend on. It lets us talk to each other. And so we'll in this talk, we'll explore how math can help us structure this issue of potential actualization. We can also count on what's concrete and present, whereas potentiality, whether there's potential in Ramanujan or not, is a subjective thing that Hardy had to decide. Is there potential in fusion? Is there potential in quantum computing? That's a question that everyone kind of decides for themselves, and they enter the market, so to speak, or they enter the world and orient themselves to what they see as potential. Whereas actuality, in the way I'm using it, I'm trying to indicate those things that are self-evident, like that I'm talking right now. And you could say, no, that's not really self-evident. Maybe it's like my imagination, but then at least it's self-evident that you're having that imagination, and that actuality is that thing, the thing that's right here, right now. That's what I'm talking about. It's just I'm trying to define terms in the sense that I'm using them. So I'm proposing that plausible fiction is a narrative tool for actualizing potential, that it might help us explain it, like how it's already happening. And it's like a punning a little bit. So it's not only a narrative tool for how it already works, but also for how to do it better. Just trying to refine which part of it is working. So we can aim for good futures by relying on increasingly plausible plans. So it explains how it already is working, maybe, if you agree, and it's helping us aim to do it better. So the plan is that I'm going to talk about someone named Eric Smith's approach to the origins of life. Again, this is like a very sprawling talk, and you're invited to poke holes in it. I'm going to discuss working language, this concept, propose a way of accounting for potential actualization, question the ethics of it, because maybe, people already were doing that. Is this going to be good? What if my good is different than your good? And then conclude with a summary. So I'll just expect that you're going to jump in if you have questions. I'll kind of go a little bit slow, but when I'm moving slowly, it's because I'm kind of waiting in case somebody has something. Okay, so I love this talk. It's an hour-long talk by someone named Eric Smith called Inevitable Life. and he lays out a theory for life's origin, and he calls it a metabolism first rather than a control first theory. So control first is you imagine that somehow there are these, 1,000 peptide RNA chains like metabolizing each other in a soup, which I just find bizarre. And there's going to be plenty of people who tell you that that's reasonable because lightning can make amino acids and stuff like that. But I think that's a bizarre theory, and I don't understand, and I'm like angry at it. And metabolism first is that, well, I'll explain in a second. The second is that he calls it a hell theory rather than heaven theory. He's just saying, all that's meaning, it sounds fancy, but he's just saying that life started in the hot depths of the ocean rather than from the sun. But anyway, that aside, the theory is formulated around reverse TCA cycle. He says that the TCA cycle, the citric acid cycle, is actually the hard direction, and the easier direction is the reverse TCH cycle, which was probably there in which he finds in all of metabolism of every ecosystem. There's this reverse TCH cycle going on, and that ecosystems, by fully completing metabolic cycles, are really the protagonists here. Individual organisms are like, if the ecosystem is a circle, individual organisms like you and me or a bug or whatever are like one sector, like, a 5-degree angle in that circle, if you wanted to make some kind of part of that arc. But the ecosystem is what's actually getting this job done. So what is the job? So he likens life to lightning strikes or hurricanes. So with lightning, there's these two charged plates, the sun and the sky and the clouds and the ground. And when there's this potential difference, and I'm punning back here again, we're back on potential, and we're going to make that connection. When there's this potential difference, electrical potential or charge difference, then between the sky and the ground, then lightning can strike and can equalize it. It actualizes that potential by creating the spark. It's like there was this potential for something to happen, and then it did happen. And with hurricanes also, there's this, it's very slow for heat to rise, actually. It takes a very long time. So the hot oceans and the cold atmosphere have this potential difference. And the eye of the hurricane, in fact, creates a little tube, or a big tube, that slurps the hot air from the ocean right up to the top of the sky. And that equalizes that difference much, much faster than it would if it wasn't for the hurricane. So in both cases, the difference would otherwise be more slowly resolved. And what Smith says is that early life was another case, that deep sea hydrothermal vents emit CH4, methane, and CO2, which are high energy molecules. But it's hard to do the work to get these high energy molecules to these low energy molecules of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. And so there's an energy emitting reaction that life was the simplest chemistry lab that could catalyze. So it's like you need a bunch of different things in order. And when you apply those catalysts in a certain order, you can get this job done. And that's what life was for. And to me, that just makes a lot of sense, that having a bunch of catalysts in a little chemistry lab seems like a much smaller ask than having thousands of amino acids arranged in a chain in exactly the right way to metabolize each other and to control things. So from this point of view, what is life? It says that life contains and orders the catalysts that perform that reaction. And as it evolves, it just is able to perform more and more energy emitting reactions. In other words, organisms organize processes for actualizing potential. That's what you are. You are an organized system of processes, of genes, say. Now we have the control of genes for actualizing potential. Like you might see some lactose and you want to actualize it, or you might see a picnic and you want to actualize it, or you might see oil underground and you want to actualize it. And we organisms, but also our companies and things like that, are organizations of processes for actualizing potential. So this fits in with this phrase by saying that the tending, this ordering and containing the catalysts, is found way back in the earliest life. It's the orderly application of procedures to bring possibilities to fruition. That is what the tending is. So those very early life capsules that had, these little capsules in the deep sea vent that had a bunch of catalysts in them were kind of tending to that methane and bringing it to a lower energy state. And the point of this is to try to make a plausible connection between origins of life and our ethics today, that our ancestors have always been carers. that caring is not something just refined, just I can't think of the word, just reduced to or just confined to humans. It's actually in this form of potential actualization is a very old thing. So it's always been the goal, and it extends all the way back to all the way from there, from the origin story to today. And I'm not using the care in a benevolent way. You know, boxers, you know, care about destruction, or a dictator cares about, you know, getting a certain kind of person out of the country. But that doesn't mean we don't have to think of it as benevolent, but it is care. You know, he did really care. And if he hadn't really cared about destroying his opponent, he would not have been as good at it. But when caring for a baby or a garden or any other project, we see some potential and we find it important to actualize it. So Hardy saw potential in Ramanujan and worked hard to get him from India, from that village, all the way into, was it Cambridge or Oxford? I've forgotten now. If you use a smartphone as a hammer, like there's a nail, right? And there's a nail that needs to be hammered in, and you take, oh, I have my iPhone, I'll use that. That would feel bad. And it's because there's potential in that iPhone, in that smartphone, that you're misusing. And to me, this could explain why slavery is wrong, that we were using humans as hammers. We were using smartphones as hammers. And that's a misuse of potential that feels bad. Like, why are we doing that to these people? You know, you can think of it as an empathy thing. And empathy is very important in care. But I think empathy is what helps you tend to potential. And like, maybe we could kind of, we could see it as slavery being wrong in a long-termist sense because it wasn't really correctly using the potential that was there. I mean, that's a very vulnerable thing, like that I'm saying here, because I'm kind of, you know, if someone, I'm a little bit, you know, this is a scary idea to me, because what it means is that if humans, for example, don't have potential in the future, then we will not, you know, then there's no ethics around us. So I think our plausible fiction for a good future would need to include what it is that humans have that is important. And I think care might be that thing. I think AI, for example, does not know how to care, and we don't know how to program care into it, but I'll get to that. So I think recombination and coordination is something that happens throughout life. If you want to accomplish some task, actualize some potential, it requires timing, right? So if you're trying to cook dinner and you leave something idle for too long, it increases the risk of failure. If you're cooking, doing surgery, gardening, timing is important. You can't just leave things around. And so you need to attend. The surgeon needs to attend in order to carry out that choreography. And so early life and ecosystems do that tending in order to keep the required entities in attendance, to keep them around, ready for when they need to be used. That catalyst needs to be used now, you know, that sort of thing. So that's the idea, but that we persist because we can recombine. So organisms are constantly recombining. We think of ourselves as regenerating, but also we're just constantly combining with new oxygen, new sugar, new calcium at different timescales. So this one's super, like every few seconds, you're recombining with new oxygen and leaving old oxygen to go away. On a scale of days, you're recombining with sugar, on calcium weeks or whatever it is. So our material form, like the ship of Theseus, is recombinant at all sorts of different timescales. And when you think about oxygen and how important that is to your life, we really are doing it quite often. We're recombining with new materials all the time. And in ecosystems, this metabolic process recombines to new forms all the time. And so life has evolved complex processing for actualizing more potential, but we do that through making ourselves more and more recombinant into new companies or whatever. And so human collectives also form, dissolve, and recombine to actualize shared potential. And the idea is that plausible fiction is designed to facilitate that sort of economy. Instead of an employment economy or a serf economy, or more recently a gig economy, we could imagine a recombinant collaboration economy where projects spring up through a plausible fiction, collaborators come and go, providing stepping stones, and then kind of dissolve after the project is complete. And what I'm wondering here is, does that seem plausible as possible as a future? That is the sort of way things will work. And basically, it's using language to kind of bring us together and narrate how things are going to work.
I think there's another question by Vincent.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
Yes.
Vincent.
I'm very curious in about economics, investing, those sorts of things. So I've been thinking about how all of this relates to economics, but these same sorts of dissolve and recombine processes happen. For example, when businesses fail, when recessions happen, and with unemployment. These are all processes that sort of on the surface, look, you know, they're quite devastating, but these are the mechanisms that economies use in order to reorganize themselves. And so you've got often countries will stagnate for a very long time, while like the US, for example, have very fast growth and then go down and back up. And it's those recessions are an indication of underlying stability because it's always able to get back up. There's all sorts of other directions this goes into, but yes, like with economics, all these things really apply.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think being able to make like we've gotten pretty bad at making things recyclable, but in some sense, nature will always try to find a way to recycle, it seems, because that's yeah, hopefully, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I think I appreciate the point. Yeah, thanks.
And another comment here, I think it's good to spell out here. So actually, it's two questions. First, I kind of tend to distinguish between laws and humans care. Like humans care about what humans are caring about and what the nature actually cares about. Because it seems that all nature cares about is maximizing the entropy. If you think about any nature process, it's about quickly increasing the entropy.
Wait,
This
I was
second
agreeing.
question is yeah.
Well, question one, I was agreeing until you said quickly. I think I agree that nature is trying to maximize entropy, but not quickly. It's trying to maximize the total integral of entropy across all time.
And I think we are talking about quickly in another different way. So by quickly, I mean, I view entropy as a measure at a certain time step. So at a certain time step, we have a state of the universe, and we have an entropy assigned to this state. And the nature cares about increasing this metric for the state quickly as time evolves. So let's talk about, imagine how life becomes to existing. It's about quickly to do some chemical process quickly, and that process actually makes the entropy increase quickly in time. So that's all nature cares about, but actually, obviously, people care about different things. They care about not maximizing the speed of increasement of entropy, but something else. So I want to draw a distinction between these two lines, these two things, and basically draw a distinction between what nature cares and what people cares.
Can we question two? Can I stick with that question?
Yeah.
Okay, so if something increased potential entropy very quickly, but then would not increase entropy for a long time, I think that something else that increases entropy even more, but not as quickly, like a siphon, where for a while, you could. First of all, I do assume that life is part of nature, and so humans are part of nature, and so we're not counter to nature. We are part of nature. So somehow it cannot be that nature wants to destroy, make entropy as fast as possible. Otherwise, it would evaporate us and burn us to a crisp so that it could get our entropy out. What it wants us for is so we can increase entropy long term by decreasing it inside, and then have more entropy overall in the future. And I think when you think of humans as part of nature and think, what is nature really doing? Is it entropy maximizing in the moment or overall? Then you see, oh, humans will make huge long projects where they'll organize a whole bunch of stuff to get oil out of the ground, do a whole bunch of neg entropy and concentrate that in themselves, but in so doing, get more entropy overall. And I think the point is, I definitely want this theory, whatever we come up with, to be accommodating both human care and natural care. First of all, because humans are nature, but second of all, because we are maximizing entropy overall for a long-term future, not just a short-term future.
might offer something on care, actually. Curious if you think, because I guess like one sort of category theory, sort of relevant way to think of it, maybe for me was think of it as just like a partial order of potentials, right? Or like, and you can kind of combine different, like maybe chemical processes have like a sort of more entropic, more entropy driven sort of preference for future worlds, but like humans, I don't think that, at least to me, it doesn't, I agree that humans are a part of nature, so we're kind of trying to think of care as like a holistic thing, but I don't think I think it's very possible, just like different humans have different sort of preferences for future states, like you can kind of have competing forces, right? One is sort of driving entropy, but humans are trying to stay alive for longer.
Yes,
right?
yes. You
So,
can
I mean,
imagine
yeah,
a village and they're building a house and it's cold outside. And some people are saying, let's just burn the wood now. And other people are saying, no, let's finish the house. And that competition would be taking place. And people are, you know, maybe freezing to death. And you have to decide, should we just burn the wood we have? We're almost done with the house. Should we just burn it or should we go finish the house? And I think entropy, you know, somehow we are very complex processes for deciding these things. And we are putting our lives on the line for these things. Anyway, I think this is a really important point. I guess what I'm trying to say to the first person who was talking, and to everyone is like, I don't want to pretend that we're not, I think we're nature. And so we have to find some way in which we're doing the same thing as nature. We're aligned. And if we can find how we're aligned with nature in a deep way, then we can work with it instead of working against it. I think our morality is trying to find deep, like if we find moral things, those are things that take longer than a lifetime to learn, but they are long-term processes for how life has worked. And so care is the sort of thing that I think is a deep, very, very deep part of us. But it is connecting into it's fine with me if it's entropy maximization, but it's long-term, you know, maximization, not just for momentary, you know, blow up. For momentary blow up, like you just nuke the whole world and then you could really get a whole bunch of entropy out. But I don't think that you're not going to get as much entropy as if we make societies that are, you know, really intricate and well aligned.
Yeah, also on what you said at the end there with the collaborators come and go, like this really is what we already see in open source development. Now, like we have collaborators that momentarily come together to achieve a certain feature or a certain tool, and then they disperse again. So yeah, I think definitely as you know, a lot more is moving towards the non-physical world, we'll see more of that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, let's move on. But I mean, I appreciate that question. I think it's one to kind of contemplate. Is there a sense in which if people are part of nature, then, and we don't know what nature is really doing, right? I don't think we should pretend that just because physics says something, we know it to be true. We should take it to be the most likely thing or something that we so far have. But I think we don't really understand how life comes about from physics. And so we can look to life as telling us something about how physics works. And maybe we're trying to maximize entropy long-term rather than short-term. But if you disagree with that, that's fine. I don't have much more to add to my point of view right now.
We have another.
Maybe in the interest of time, I see Vincent has his hands up, but let's keep the question for later, probably. I feel David wants to move on to the central part.
Okay. Actually, that seems fine. Yeah, either way is fine. Okay, so working language. What do I mean by that? Language works. I think language works in the sense of basic physics. Like when you move energy, when energy moves something along a path, a path that you wanted to move it along, you say that you got work out of it. So I think language does work. And if I say pass the salt, like literally 10 to the 25, I you know, in a salt shaker, all these atoms move through space. If somebody says there's a lot of oil underground in Oklahoma, you know, it inspires a lot of different groups to collaborate. You know, you have financiers, engineers, surveyors, safety experts. Each one of them, you know, is working together in a very different way to actualize that, but like to actualize the potential, yes. And also that the language that they use to talk to each other is getting the oil out of the ground. So the required coordination is impressive and it actualizes the potential, but it couldn't happen, I think, without language to guide it. Even if you say pass the salt, it involves it involves like complex planning and high precision control to get your muscles to get that thing done. And I think that getting that language set up, the setup to get this high precision control happening, requires learning, evolution and learning. And I don't think it'd be very easy to understand how pass the salt works in terms of just the four forces of electromagnetism, gravity, strong force, weak force. We need some different way of looking at the world than just this very small scale. You know, you could look at the world at the tiniest scale, but I'd rather look at something in a way that was scale free. And so I think that I don't know what that is, okay, but I'm thinking that working language is something we need to include. So it needs to be explained or needs to be axiomatic or something. I don't know. So how does language work? There are other working languages, and they all evolve towards expressing intention. So DNA is working language, or in my sense, it's a written language in the sense that you don't need, like when I'm talking right now, I'm putting energy through my vocal cords to wiggle them back and forth very fast. But DNA just sits there. It's a very long-term structure that doesn't need much care to hold itself in place. And so it's this ACGT symbol system that code for cellular chemistry. Computer programming languages do a lot of work in the world, and so they are also working languages, and they evolve from assembly language to, you know, C and Pascal and eventually up to, say, Excel. And Excel is very good at expressing intentions. People from all over the world can just express what they want to do in terms of Excel. And the code on translation, if you look at DNA, I guess I'm skipping back to that, you take 3 of these 4 letters. So you take a sequence of 3, and there's 64, 4 to the power 3 is 64 codons. And some of them are stop codons and who cares, blah, blah, blah. But there's a function that takes these 64 or, you know, around 60 to the 20 amino acids. And that function is information theoretically optimal. It's like a 1 in a million for minimizing destructive error. So somehow this language itself, just a translation system for how these symbols turn into chemistry, must evolve before our genetics even got online towards being very, very good at expressing intentions. And again, programming languages are consistently being refined to foreground our intentions. We don't care about the push and pop of a stack. We care that, like, you know, this number is the sum of these other numbers. So expressing ideas in a regulated language is what I mean by an account. The word count here is trying to point to something more than just a narrative. It's this regulated language. So accountants regulate how we describe the flow of financial resources. They say, no, that doesn't count that doesn't work as an account here. And so they regularize it. And in trials, judges regulate how people account for their actions. They say objection, you know, the lawyer will say objection, and they say overruled or, you know, sustained, to allow people to have a very regular way that they're going to account for their actions. And when we give physical accounts or legal accounts or social accounts, they might be of the same event, but in each one, there's some sort of way that we don't really allow people to talk. In a social setting, there might be very different ways of regulating, but I think in every social situation, you'll find that there is some kind of regulation going on when people are giving accounts of things. So the more regulated the account is, the more it helps us coordinate and solve larger problems. So if you let just kind of anything go in a social context, that might be fun, but it's not going to let you really coordinate and solve larger problems. Because when you misalign your efforts, it creates this friction and loss. And yeah, you can get a bunch of entropy in a short term, but you can't get a bunch of entropy created in the long term, or neg entropy. So, which is basically the flip side of that coin. So coordination helps us avoid stepping on each other's toes. And to collaborate, our activities must align and be clearly explained. That way we can kind of do the right timing to have the financier and the engineer and the shipper all get the oil out of the ground together. And so as collectives mature, if you form a company or something and your collective, or if you have a spouse or something, your collective will mature. So your accounts can become more systematic. You avoid the language that doesn't work, and you start moving towards the language that does work. Because misunderstandings create inefficiency. If I hide things from you, if I have externalities and I'm not telling you about, that's just going to increase our complexity. That's just going to make it harder for us to really work together. Whereas systematicity improves transparency, speed, and reliability. And I think a lot of what's gone on in the world so far is that we've been many different worlds. We've been a Europe and a America and a this and a that, and we've been different places. But as the world becomes one collective, as what happens in Greece today affects us, hours later, we need to be able to work together and not hide variables from each other in order just to get things done better. It's not a moral thing. We see it as a moral thing these days. You shouldn't lie, you shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't have externalities. But in fact, it's just the same sort of thing again, which is that if you want to get something done, if you want to increase overall entropy or whatever, that's a kind of weird way to think about it, that we're just burning this place up. But we're burning it up as slowly as we can so that we can get as much burned up as possible long term. It's kind of a weird point of view. I think someone had a question. Maybe not. But yes, so we're trying to, even if you see it as we're trying to increase entropy overall, which might not be the real thing, but even if you see it that way, we need to like make things work together. And so the most systematic and trustworthy languages for such accounts, I think, is math. And I think of mathematical fields as crystallized accounting systems, one that have kind of hardened. So arithmetic is how you account for the flow of quantities, as in finance. Hilbert spaces, if you want to give an account of elementary particles in quantum mechanics, you use this language to account for it. If you want to account for who's winning in poker, you use probability. If you want to account for relative rates of change, you use calculus. These are accounting systems. And what we want is a systematic accounting for potential actualization. And I don't know what that should be, but people invent new accounting systems all the time. That's what a mathematician does. But also, anyone who creates mathematics, like Andrea, who created co-design. So he wanted to account for collaborative design. And so he made a new way of accounting for it. And so this is not something you should think of as for someone else to do. This is for us to do. If we want to make systematic accounting, we want to be able to carefully track the phenomena, articulate or make the joints of the structure, and systematize it. And so what I'm trying to talk about here is articulating the structure of potential actualization. Can we do that? Can you do better than what I have? I hope people can take what's here and make it better. So category theory, if all language is crystallized accounting systems, category theory is the accounting system for, I think, something like interlocking structures. So mathematical definitions are composed of interlocking structures, and category theory tracks and layers those structures and their connections. And so by doing that, it makes analogies, which are similarities of structure, the fact that we can find something at all scales or the same phenomenon happening in many different ways. We can find those similarities and we can define them as formal objects. And so Bill Levere called category theory conceptual mathematics. It's not quantitative as much as it is being able to put concepts together. Now, I just want to note, I'm not telling you that I have a category theoretic account of plausible fiction. I would like to. But so everything I'm saying is just, just an idea. So here are some keywords where we've been, and then we'll talk about where we're going. Plausible fiction, it starts now, it ends well, it's plausible, well in your own sense, whoever's writing it, and it's understandable. And the mechanism is that you fill the gaps. Care is what actualizes potential by tending to things. Life is carers, basically, that notice and actualize potential. Recombinant collaboration is that parts join together, labor together, and separate, and they kind of learn from each other in the process. They learn about themselves, they learn about their teammates, they learn about the project, and then they go and do it again. So in terms of economics, you have a bunch of people joining together on some project. As they leave, they're going to know, I really like working with Bill and Alice, but I don't like working with Bob. And also, I seem to be better at X than I was at Y, et cetera. You learn about yourself, you learn about the project, you learn about others, and you kind of keep going. Working language is language from Rust or English or ACGT that coordinates activity. And mathematics is this highly crystallized, regulated accounting system that actually does work in the world to make things happen. And as for where we're going, we care about having a good or at least an open future. I think everyone cares about that by definition of what good could mean. We want to know if it's plausible, if plausible fiction can help us get there. That's what we're talking about in this talk. And I'm proposing a mathematical count of how it might work, but this is very much work in progress. It has lots of gaps, and it's not finished, and it's maybe not even on the right track. So we'll also talk about ethics to see, will this lead to good futures? Because I would really like the future to be good. Did you guys talk about Petri nets in class?
No.
No,
No,
but
okay.
I think they will understand what they are. They know.
Yeah,
that
they're very easy. They're very easy things. So they consist of two things: resources, which are sometimes called places or species, but I think the best way to think of them are resources, and transitions. So a transition consists of an input and an output, which are collections of resources. So in the separate egg transition, you're transitioning from the resource egg to the transition egg yolk and egg white. And so the Petri net is just a bunch of different resources and transitions. And so people draw these things in very clunky ways, in my opinion, where the resources are circles and the transitions are either diamonds or squares, I forget. But I'll just draw them as lines, strings and boxes. So here we have this big transition that takes crust and butter and sugar, blah, 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 and makes an unbaked pie. And then we could take another transition that takes an unbaked pie and an oven and creates a baked pie. But to make this big transition, we have lots of little transitions in there, and each one has some resources that come in. So to make lemon filling, the transition that takes butter, sugar, and yolk and creates lemon filling, we're calling make lemon filling. But you could imagine opening this box up and seeing a bunch of deeper boxes. Oops. So this whole thing is called an execution. It's not exactly a transition, so I kind of misspoke there. But it's the same sort of thing. Each one of these transitions is an execution, but you can put executions together to get larger executions. So there are 5 transitions in this execution. In category theory, a Petri net is called a signature for a symmetric monoidal category. It's the stuff you need to make a symmetric monoidal category. And the executions are exactly the morphisms in that symmetric monoidal category. Now, we could imagine that instead of knowing how to separate the egg, that we've kind of filled it from the ground up and that we already know what it is. We could imagine we don't know how to separate an egg. We don't know how to make a lemon filling. We don't know how to do this thing. And so we have this thing called prepare pie, and it's a plausible fiction that we can actually do it. And so each one of the boxes here is like a gap that we don't know how to fill yet. We don't even know if it's possible. So we could take the world of today and the good future in whatever sense we mean, and try to break it down and prove that conjecture by proving that by saying, oh, well, if we can separate the egg or whatever, sequester the carbon, and we can make the lemon filling and we can do this, then we'll be able to have a good future. And someone says, yeah, but how are we going to really sequester carbon at scale? And so somebody says, okay, I think I can, fill in that gap. Even though I don't know how to yet, I think I can do it. And they make, a proof that has 3 gaps left in it. And so that's the idea. So you kind of fill gaps with recipes. And again, it's kind of recursively, you're kind of recursively doing it. If you look at this and you say, I think I can help with filling crust, then that's where you're gonna, as an economic agent or whatever, you're gonna hang out and fill crust. Whereas if somebody else says like, I think I can help with make a lemon filling, they're gonna do that. If somebody else says, man, I wanna use that lemon filling for something else, they're making a plausible fiction that makes this one harder to happen. Less likely to happen, because they're saying, once you're done with that lemon filling, hey guys, wouldn't it be better if we used it for just eating right now? And then maybe that's what's going to happen. So what I want to do is say that the bunker plan that all these billionaires have is not plausible, because what's much more plausible is that in that kind of world, it's not going to work well for them. It's much more plausible that people are going to make backdoors to those bunkers, that there's no way they can trust people to make a world that's bad for themselves but good for the billionaires, and that we all need to be in this together. And if we can make that more plausible, that it's bad to try to be selfish than good, then we can take the resource that they have and move it in a different direction. Anyway, what I'm showing here is something called an operad, where you kind of take small things and build big things, or take big things and kind of separate them or factor them into small things. An operad algebra is roughly a syntax for gap filling. So it's kind of like at the end, you might say, hey, I am fine. I don't need you to explain how to separate an egg. I already know how to do that. Or somebody says it's one of these boxes might be like move arm or pass salt. You don't need to kind of break it up into a lot of separate pieces. So I don't know, I'm losing my voice here. So the operad functor from O to set is called an algebra, and it is just a way of filling in boxes with basically with know-how. Okay. So maybe a question? I feel like I'm losing my voice a little, so I need like a break or something. Any questions so far?
If I could ask, yeah, well, and it's kind of related to our class, I guess. I mean, this feels like, maybe I'm, you know, finding a nail for my hammer, but it feels like almost like a less descriptive version of co-design, right? Where if you imagine like kind of each of the wires, like you need enough lemon filling to fill crust, and you need to make sure that you break enough, you know, you have enough yolk, eggs, and butter to make enough lemon filling. So like co-design seems like it's just adding kind of like, sort of like weights almost, or sort of counts to the wires. And you know, you can imagine like resources, each of these are resources that turn into functionalities that then are used as resources, and you have a kind of greater design problem broken down into composable design problems. I'm wondering if maybe Joella or if David or whoever has thoughts about whether these are actually very similar or not. Yeah.
Depending on the voice, I can answer, or David can answer, I guess. Depending on
I think that there's still work. I think that making the connection between Petri nets and co-design is actually a little bit open. I mean, I think someone who wanted to kind of understand that might. This is giving an actual recipe, not saying if I had this, then I would do this. Whereas co-design is saying, hey, I know how to do it. Don't worry about it. I've got that handled. So I think of this as more like the mechanism. But Joella, maybe you can say what you think too.
Yes, exactly. It is. This is an operatic viewpoint. So in code, the analogy for co-design would be that you are aware of the functionalities resources, which still you would write it as diagram, but then you don't necessarily know how to fill the boxes. So what is the options you have to choose from, right?
Right. There may be many ways to make lemon filling, and some of them take more butter and less butter than others.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think making that connection, actually, if somebody wanted to do I don't know whether it might not be enough for a master's thesis or something, but I think there's actually a paper there to like, what is the real relationship between co-design and Petri nets, and how should we think about that? I think it's maybe it's been done, but I don't remember it myself. Yeah. Right. There's other, so what I said here was like, you could put in your know-how into these boxes and say, I know how to separate egg. If I know how to separate egg, I know how to make lemon filling, I know how to do this, this, and this, then I know how to do the whole thing. So know-how is an algebra. But there's also an algebra which would be like how long it takes. So if this one takes 2, these two can be done in parallel. One takes 15 and 1 10, 2 and 3. Well, since I can do these in parallel, the whole process is in 22 minutes. So there are different algebras that you could put here. So I'm proposing operads may serve as a mathematical foundation for gap filling. And then from there, it could be pretty easy to make a software platform. So you could say, people type in or talk in some plausible fiction, and then the LLM could convert it into a Petri net. It could say, oh, I see. Well, along the way, you seem to need butter, sugar, you seem to need yolk, etc. And it could say, like, it seemed that you made lemon filling at some point. And it could maybe just fill in, like, what's the Petri net? Or whatever's appropriate, whatever the real math should be. And then collaborators could fill in any open box with more plausible fiction, and or just do it. So if one of the boxes said, move your arm, you could just do it instead of filling in the plausible fiction of like, well, my brain cell would, tell my arm cell to move or whatever. So I was imagining some kind of like conjecture proving or job completion TaskRabbit platform. So if somebody wanted to just make this, I think it could be makeable. So in TaskRabbit, you say, hey, can you organize my closet or something? Well, instead, imagine a kind of recombinant collaboration platform where people would join in, see some plausible fictions, and say, oh, I want to help with that, and kind of fill in a gap. somewhere in that plausible fiction. So now I don't know if this would be a good future, and I think you should only do this if you think it would. But I think robots and humans could work together to get things done on such a platform by just joining in and seeing like, oh yeah, I can handle that part. I'll do that. Now, would it help humanity actualize potential? Like, I think so this lightning bolt or river crossing analogy is a guiding image. If we make X more likely by offering a mimetically fit proposal for it, then it should happen. It's more likely to happen. And so, yeah, as I said, this would be recombinant. Now, I think it is possible that it could be abused. I don't like someone say, you know, I'm going to use this to, you know, do something that Alice does, something that Bob doesn't like, right? So I'm interested in people's thoughts about whether this would lead to a good future or if it's just what's inevitable anyway or what. So I'm moving into this ethics piece, which is also, you know, a bit strange for a talk in an academic setting outside of a philosophy class, but I think it's more and more important. I think people need to think about their own ethical lines, how they're going to make ethical decisions, whether you're going to work for a weapons manufacturing company or not. I mean, I think someone has to protect, you know, people. So maybe it's fine and maybe it's not. I don't know, but I think it's important to think about. So ethics is supposed to be this theory of what we ought to do, but I don't know what ought means. It really comes from the word owe, like what is owed. But it's a care word. So it points to what we deeply care about, what matters most to us, but I don't think that there is just one ought. I think if there is, then it should be a natural thing and not a human thing. So deep cares are those that we keep even as our surface cares change. So, you know, I might care a lot about a donut and I might go out of my way to get a donut, but once I'm done with the donut, I'm not, it's like the taste is out of my mouth and I'm just kind of full and it's not actually that worth it. So I'm calling that a non-sustainable care. You're not really sustaining the care. Or like Mike Tyson cared about beating others, but it wasn't sustainable. He's recently had another fight where he did it terribly and it's like obvious and it's not a sustainable thing to keep beating people up. So the care is to end slavery in contrast, or the care is to decrease infant mortality. I think we're never going to lose that care. We never want our babies to die. And so those are sustaining cares. So I think when there's a persistent problem, when there's a bad actor or a bad system, they attract our attention and we actually work on it. And people will fight very hard to prevent that person from succeeding. And other people who consider them to be good will fight very hard to show that it has potential. And so here's another, you know, very suspect thing, but that sustainable care might be a definition of good, because a care that can be sustained must fit with the world's dynamics. It's good to work on things we can sustainably care about. It feels bad when you work on something for a long time. You know, you work on a degree in some subject, and then when you get out, you can't use it. And you can't even use all the stuff that you learned. That feels bad. So what feels good is when we can sustain our cares. When what we care about now sustains into the future, then that's like, that feels good. And maybe that just is what good could mean. Because I'm not trying to define what good means, which one is the good action, you know, Trump or Harris. I'm not trying to define that. I'm trying to define what each person, the one who votes for Trump and the one who votes for Harris, could mean by good in themselves. And what they might mean is that the world will be better long term. We can sustain our world better if we go this way rather than that way. So it's worthwhile to actively recognize and then phase out unsustainable cares. If you notice something you're doing that is not going to sustain, then I think you should focus your attention elsewhere, because it's going to feel bad when the sustaining stops. And that my hope is that plausible fiction can help us envision transitions to a more sustainable practices, and that by collaborating, we can accelerate the phasing out processes. We can notice when things are unsustainable cares and then show that unsustainability. Now, karma literally means the law of cause and effect, but my version of it is, you know, this what goes around comes around. It's not a magic idea.
David,
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. There is a question for Victor.
Hi, yeah. Hope you can hear me. Thanks a lot for the talk so far. I've been really enjoying it. I had a question related to sort of the relationship between ethics and PF. In some way, it seems like PF precedes ethics, because PF defines what we imagine as sustainability, and then ethics is like the identification of that sustainability and moving with it. Is that something that makes sense? Is that reasonable to expect? What are your thoughts on that?
I think ethics is like a theory, whereas morality is like a feeling or something. And ethics is the
Okay.
theory of like, what is it that like sustains long term? Like you don't, there's taboos about incest and stuff like that, because those are, those don't work well. You might care
Right.
about, this relationship right now, but it's not going to work out or whatever. So ethics are supposed to be things that take a long time to learn, that you just imbue into people so that they know something that could take longer than their lifetime to learn. But yeah, I think they are like, what I'm trying to propose here is that maybe ethics is just the story of sustainable, what cares are sustainable and which ones aren't. And that like infant mortality and ending slavery are just like things that are sustainable cares. But that, yeah, plausible fiction is more like a mechanism for getting cares accomplished. But if it eventually dies and doesn't work, then you kind of wish you hadn't spent the time on it. So ethics is kind of what might help us guide where we put our time in plausible fiction.
So in some way, ethics is the definition. Ethics is the theory of what are sustainable cares.
I think so.
And then PF is sort of PF is the iterative process of refinement of moving towards a more sustainable ethics or better ethics in some way.
No, you can use plausible fiction to just F everything up. It doesn't mean you can do it for anything, but it's just not going to work out for you. It's just going to suck later on. But yeah, but the first part I agree. Like the first part is what I'm trying to say, and I hope it sounds like you buy it.
Ethics as the category of things that sustainable, or things that we can sustainably care about.
Ethics as the theory of what is sustainable care. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really quickly, that's also kind of like Kant, I think, has a lot of sustainability baked into his sort of ethics system. So it's kind of been talked about.
Nice.
Vincent, you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. There's a book on exactly this dynamic. You may have heard of it, The End of History and the Last Man by Francis Fukuyama. Have you read it?
No.
So it argues that liberal democracy is the form of government which has, or the form of organizing a society that can guarantee the most stable configuration of recognition games. And so that people crave recognition. One of the ways to do that is to say, I'm better than others, and then you conquer them to prove that. But that's not sustainable because everyone allies against you. But in a liberal democratic order, what you have is equal recognition. And so people strive towards things like banning slavery. That's something which people care about because they care about people being equally recognized. At the UN, every country's flag will be flown because countries are seen as nominally equal in this like recognition sense. And the book argues that liberal democracy, by providing this stable sense of recognition, is sort of the convergent state that societies come towards. So
I don't know if for me, I'm like, okay, then what would recognition be on a deep level? And what I think of is like, maybe it's that equal recognition means that you don't get trapped in bad equilibria where just a few voices are heard. Like if nature is searching for potential actualization and we get stuck in some bad equilibrium, then we don't hear all the voices. So you want your temperature on your annealing thing or whatever to be high enough that you can hear all the voices and have like the Ramanujans of the world get noticed. That's at least what my brain does with what Fukuyama, my interpretation of your reading of Fukuyama.
Yes, and so you need to get to that point, and you have these like high temperature events, like wars, often reorganize things very quickly. That's a very high temperature thing for a society to do, or evolution. So evolution tends to be punctuated equilibrium. When an environment changes, evolution will very quickly catch up. And so it responds to the environment. Human societies are also, in a way, different ways of organizing and cooperating, which is a lot of what we've been talking about. It's these societies will be pitted against each other. But yeah, it's Francis Fukuyama's The End of History and the Last Man. It uses like Hegelian philosophy about recognition to do all of this. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'll look into it. Thanks. So by karma, I just mean the law of cause. What goes around comes around, right? And the point is that I think that the ecosystem is in some sense processing what are squirrels good at, and can we use them to plant nuts? But I think these karmic loops are currently they're getting shorter. I think we're finding people hitting their moment faster. So my guess is that as cultural processing with TikTok and AI and stuff like that, I go into AI, I go into LLMs and I like type, hey, can you explain this thing to me? And I make more sense of it than I did before. And so I think we're sharing YouTube explainer videos and like all these things, and we're understanding the world better and better. And like now, Francis Fukuyama is in our minds, and Hegel and Kant and all these people. So we're understanding like where can I look to understand what I need to understand about why things are not working out correctly. And so I think AI, but also, all sorts of technology will improve people's ability to make sense of community behaviors, and that what goes around will come around faster. When someone is basically messing things up and causing a lot of inefficiencies, the system will find them faster and will point them to their own error. So I kind of propose that as a base self-cannibalism where you eat your own arm or something, like it's just obviously unsustainable. You know it without having to say like, open up an ethics book. Whereas cannibalism is taboo, but eating your own self-cannibalism is self-evidently bad. Now, this Emperor Nero, he basically ate his own support system. He killed his mother for power. He after Rome all burned, he like made a 40-foot statue made of gold of himself. He won 1,800 out of 1,800 competitions for singing in his own empire. So he just went around like winning these, like in a place where he had complete control. He was so self-indulgent that he was like proud of himself for winning competitions in that atmosphere. And he basically ate his own foundation. He self-indulged, and it didn't end well for him. And so I think just like cancer killed its host, human traffickers are in some sense human trafficking humans. We're self-cannibalizing. It's just that by thinking of ourselves as separate things, we don't see that we're just literally self-cannibalizing. Humanity itself is self-cannibalizing. And so I think there is a way, there's something called autophagy or autophagy, where cells eat parts of themselves. They kind of like do some cleanup. They eat it's kind of like eating your old reserves or something like that and making new ones. But nothing eats itself in a kind of cannibalistic way. And I think that as we like ethics and karma and stuff like that is kind of like, just don't eat yourself. And I think that soon, as karmic loops get shorter, the system may hold us accountable for our own net contribution to it. And so it's kind of like, this is a little bit like a warning, not that I know any better than you, but just like I kind of think if you agree that karmic loops are getting shorter, don't do anything that, you're gonna not be able to say as part of making a world that you think is good. So recently, a robotics meets AI company, they want, robots to have more and more AI in them. And I think that might be where the future is going. I'm not saying that I think that's implausible. It's just a matter of what do you want to speed up? When I contribute to something, what am I speeding up? What am I putting myself into? So I felt really unsure about like, this company, if they make weapons robots, like I'm helping with that, right? So I was worried about it. And so I asked a bunch of people. And in the end, I kind of just used this plausible fiction framework, which I think is just basically consequentialism in this sense. But what happened is that I was having a conversation with two people at the company. And I posed this question. I said, let's suppose that we were super successful and it worked out great, and that AI entered robotics and we made robots brilliant. Can you imagine a good future that includes that? Like, do you think it's plausible that we would have more plausible that the future would be good or bad? And the first person said, well, my go-to is always a Wall-E world where robots help us scavenge for materials and food. And I was like, well, that's not an overall better world. That's worse. So, and then the second person said, well, I'm sure robots will help humans in a lot of different ways. And I said, yeah, I agree, but would the overall world be better? If robots were brilliant, would the overall world be better? And she didn't have a response. And so I didn't take the grant. And I think, you can't always do that. If you don't have enough money to live, you may decide that it's worth it to you to take the money. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to condemn that person, but I also think it's possible to say, I would rather not do that, even if it would help me. And So the ethical litmus test is just that if in order to do project P, just ask, if we were successful at P, is it easier to imagine a good future from there or a bad future? And if the overall futures are worse for yourself, your family, your community, your world, then doing P is in some sense selling out or disloyal or unethical or self-cannibalizing to that self, that family, that community, or that world. And that's okay, you can do that. It's just that if karmic loops get faster and you get found out, you are going to have to, it is going to come back. So I think it's just a completely it's not supposed to be, you shouldn't do it because it's bad. You shouldn't do it because it's self-cannibalism. You're hurting yourself.
There's a question.
Yeah, I had a question. One thing that I'm very curious about is, as you perhaps codify a thought or an idea within the framework of plausible fiction, how would you imagine alternatives to that thought or idea within the context of operatic algebras? Because earlier when you gave the example of making that pie, what if I'm a vegetarian and I want to substitute in something for egg, like for an egg or something? In this context, how do you imagine alternatives? Especially like, I think this parable is like an excellent example where you went through that idea of imagining alternatives, where you said, what would my life look like if I took this grant versus not taking this grant? How did you go through that process with thinking through these alternatives?
Yeah, I think the operatic viewpoint is not complete and that we really need better math than what I gave. So I would love to make this better. So you shouldn't count on the operatic viewpoint as being the how it's going to work. You're right. Like if you want to talk about alternatives, it doesn't seem like it's there and other things like that. In this case, I asked the people who were in the company to help me think through it. And probably if I told them like, hey, I'm going to like be talking about this and like using you guys as examples. I mean, it is anonymized, but still like, can you do better? I hope that they actually would be able to imagine a plausible fiction, a plausible good world. But if they can't, then what you could use these plausible fictions for is say, hey, like you're super talented and smart and you're working for a thing that's making the world in your own mind worse. Like, here's a different way that you could use your talents. And if you can make a plausible way that they can use their talents that they approve of, they're probably not only, if they can make just as much money or they can have just as much fulfillment in their life, they may very well jump at it and even be better at it because they wouldn't be conflicted. So like, I think plausible fiction is about guiding the resources we have away from negative usage and towards positive uses in our own minds of what's good and bad. And I think that there's more if we think of ourselves first as a small entity, like this human, form, we might not get the right answer. But if we think about like ourselves and our family and our like community and world as ourselves, then I think we're going to get the right answer in terms of like what good means. And that like there'll be like more broad agreement on it. That's a hope, at least. I don't know if I quite answered your question or not.
Seems so.
Okay. So I'm almost done. Judith Butler is a feminist moral theorist, and she said that morality just is giving an account of ourselves. So if we, like in your head, you kind of rehearse your plan to account for your actions, you have this inner dialogue, and you said, well, if somebody asked me about this is what I'd say. But to Butler, this accounting of ourselves is our morality. So you can decide for yourself whether you think that's what morality is, just how you account for your behavior. I think we also need to account for our own sake that language, even just to help ourselves, not to be better, not to like make a better world, but just to have a better life for our own personal individual body, that language helps us with that. So if we want to decide on our purpose, our ethics, our goals, that these are all dialogues and dialectics we have with the world. If you want to make plans or carrying them out, it always requires communication. So language empowers you, it works, and it helps us account in order, like our accounting gets things done. At DNA level, genes get things done. They decide what proteins and proteins that we can produce. So the accounting really gets stuff done, but it also is morality. And that's kind of the point of this talk is not, it is to propose something, but to propose something so that you see what the general theme is, so you can do a better job than I am, which is what is a natural way to understand ourselves so that our cares and what's good for us as what's deeply important, but also what just gets stuff done. How are those aligned so we can do both at the same time? And I don't know whether you could use plausible fiction, whether that'll lead to a good future. People will tell you, people have told me many times that killing all mosquitoes is actually perfectly fine. You can genocide all mosquitoes, and that's actually good. And I'll say, but aren't there possibly unintended consequences? And they say, no, scientists have really thought this through. And in this case, I know it sounds weird, but it really is good. And I'm like, maybe they're right. I just don't know. I'm probably not going to work on that one, but somebody else who did, I'm not going to condemn them. I just won't do it myself. If we had a platform to realize plausible fiction, it could lead to a good future, but it could lead to people like, killing all mosquitoes or any other thing that they consider all bad. So the last thing we want to do, though, is self-cannibalize. I think that's just obviously bad and doesn't require any moral theory to figure out. So to conclude, plausible fiction, at least I'm proposing, may help us move towards better futures in the sense of whoever's writing it. It starts now, ends well, is plausible, mimetically fit, and you collaborate by filling gaps with action or more plausible fiction. Care actualizes potential by tending to it, by being there in a kind of listening and acting form. So you actively, I think that care has been actively maintained since the origin of life, if we just think about it as what actualizes potential. But that carers in all forms, they mine the world for potential. They lift out into the light of actuality. They lift out that potential. That math is a systematic accounting system that leads to potential actualization, whether there's banks and stores of food or rockets or computers, they require mathematics. And that category theory, for example, operads, could formalize plausible fiction, but I just want to make sure you know that I don't think that's at all done, and that I think it's really interesting if somebody wants to help with that. Ethics, finally, is sustainable care, and that aligns with lasting good outcomes. But good in what sense? I think this good just is sustainable care, or at least that's what I'm proposing as a possibility. That unsustainable care self-cannibalizes and reduces future potential overall, and therefore if you look at long-term entropy maximization, that unsustainable care is that which will not be long-term entropy maximizing. And so I'm proposing that, hey, let's seek sustainable care and collaborate on these enduring futures. So thanks.
Thank you, David. That was great. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, David, for the interesting talk. I have a question about the gap filling, the slide 13 or 12. So, for instance, like, have you thought about not losing yourself and figuring out the gaps? So, for instance, make lemon filling here. You could go to more sub gaps, if you will, to, for instance, planting a lemon tree and get the lemon and then create the lemon filling. So, is there a way to quantify what does it make? What are like certain gaps make sense to define this plausible fiction of preparing a pie, for instance?
I think I didn't fully understand the question, but I think I understood that, like, you might want to refactor this and say, like, I don't want to have make lemon filling being a box. I might want a slightly different box, or to refactor it differently, but I'm not sure if I got it.
So, like, if I want to connect it to the next slide, when you have times for each gap, so it makes sense for making a pie that this is going to take 22 minutes. But I can go like deeper into the lemon filling, for instance, and think about how planting the lemon tree, then it's going to probably take years. So then this plausible fiction it doesn't make sense at this time frame to wait for like a number of years to make the pie. So is there a way, or like, to quantify what a sensible plausible fiction?
Yeah, I just realized it's very strange. I don't have the like lemon as a wire here. So like lemon, this lemon filling has no lemon flavor. Sorry, guys. But like, let's say there's lemon coming back out here. Then over here somewhere is like produce lemons, and there's a box that like plant lemon tree, etc. And one weird thing about this that makes it seem a little bit wrong is like, I don't care which lemon I get, whereas plant lemon tree kind of means that there's like a bunch of lemons coming out with like lemon, like wire, and one of the wires is coming in here. And so again, it's not quite the right story. But yeah, you're right. Like there's externalities here. Where we get the lemon, where we get the butter, the sugar, these come from actual chickens, and these come from actual cows. And so like where we're getting these things is externalities that this fiction leaves out. There might be a larger, in our platform of plausible fiction, you might zoom out, squeeze your fingers together, zoom out, and see that this is part of something much bigger that includes factory farming and stuff like that, and decide that you don't want to participate in that, or that you don't mind participating in that. And that, and so that's at least where my mind goes with what you said. I don't know if I answered your question.
Any other question for David?
Yeah, one, I don't know if it's a question or comment, but I think one important thing that we have been discussing during the whole talk, but not formally introduced in the talk, is what we define as the scope of ourselves. Like different people have different definitions. Some people only care about themselves at this time step. Some people care about their life. Some people care about the whole human beings. And that actually defines what is sustainable, what is self-cannibalism, and what is good or bad. So there's a very important concept here that is what someone considers as themselves, as a part of a concept that is the same as himself.
Yes, that's super important. And so when Judith Butler says giving account of oneself, here I kind of pretended that I thought it only meant if someone asked me about this behavior, what would I do? But I actually think that she more means what you just said, like how do I account for what I am? That once you make that account, that defines your morality. I only read the first couple chapters of her book that has this title because it got into very Frankfurt School stuff that I didn't really know about. But I don't know what she's saying, but I completely agree with whoever was just speaking that deciding what do we mean by ourselves, and it is very important for really making decisions. And if we don't pick it for ourselves, then we're kind of picking a default view. And that default view might be wrong in the sense that it might be unsustainable, it might lead us to a bad life, etc.
Yes.
Any question? Yeah.
David, are you familiar with the Game of Life and Cellular Automata?
I'm familiar with Game of Life and Cellular Automata, yeah.
So have you thought about the connection between, because somehow I think of the framework that you're developing is maybe thinking of how the life plays out, and that there might be a connection between this and that. I'm not sure, but I'm just thinking out loud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a model of interaction between things, but I haven't seen anything that kind of, I don't know whether in Game of Life how many little black and white squares you would need to make something that is self-repairing, when like no matter what damage happened, or for any damage of type T, this thing will self-repair, or what that even means. But it's a really interesting framework that, and in the sense that it's so complete, it is such a it shows such a picture of something, whatever it is showing. And I don't know whether it's showing something like what we have in this world or not. Mm-hmm. But for example, gliders don't sustain themselves. If they touch anything, they just completely disintegrate. So they don't seem to care. I don't know if anything is like able to kind of tend to something in that, maybe it might take a bunch of those little dots to get that up and running. Of course, I mean, we're at a huge, people often say that we're so small. If you look at the world, we're so tiny, and that's true, but we're also huge in terms of the what I've heard is that from the smallest length scale to the largest length scale, we're about at the middle, like in terms of powers of 10. So like we have tons and tons of stuff inside of us also, and we're huge. So maybe it's fine that it takes so many of those cells in order to get carrying up and running. I don't know.
It makes me think of Douglas Hofstadter's strange loops, right? A little bit like which also kind of feels like category theory sometimes. So
Yes.
Self-reflective. So yeah.
David, I have many things to discuss. I think we will have to organize a separate call also. Maybe my
Sounds
main,
good. I appreciate the time. Thanks everyone for your questions and ideas.
maybe I want just to add one food for thought, or I think you are on that, but it looks to me somehow I connect this to various other things. One of these things is planning in the broader sense. And what you presented today looks like a framework to evaluate plans and to say whether plans will, assuming that you model this in this way, those are axioms and you have to satisfy those axioms in a way, right? I think that what still is unclear to me, and I think it's what we want to work on, is what's the magic to then find the alternative, right? So, or we have a way, with this framework, we might have a way to evaluate whether some choices of different people, different designs, different technologies would be plausible enough, would be self-sustaining and so on. But coming up with the actual solutions, filling the boxes, that's still unclear. And it's unclear to me whether the same mathematics will have to be used. Maybe there will need to be complementary mathematics in a way. But that's super interesting to work on.
Yeah, what the main difference I see, and maybe I should say this in the talk next time, the difference I see between planning and plausible fiction is that for planning, I imagine a company or a bunch of people that they know they're going to be together, they know that they're going to work together to finish this project, or that they're going to be a company that sustains throughout the whole thing. Whereas plausible fiction is trying to like send things out into the world and saying, hey, who wants to collaborate on this with me? And to try to make things plausible that they just would happen because enough people see the potential in them, not necessarily a group that already exists or has plans to work together.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, another analogy could be you have a very complex dynamical systems and you're trying to create some sort of stability properties in a sense, right? But my point is, this works if I give you a dynamical system or a choice of interaction of dynamical systems, but coming up with those dynamical systems in the first place, such that they satisfy those properties, it's a separate story, right? But it's part of the picture because that's where quantitative, there might be many ways to do lemon filling for the pie, and you don't only want to have people try out and whatever works, but maybe you want to infuse some sense of accountability in resources, for instance, a quantitative measure of what you were saying before, right? Okay, where are you sourcing your lemons from, or these things, right? So that has to be part of the picture. I still don't know how. I have some ideas we have to discuss, but super interesting.
That sounds great. Yeah, it's something between making a good meme, one of these picture memes, but also like a flash mob. So it's like a meme plus, people getting together and actually doing the thing is the idea. But yeah. Anyway, thank you, Joella, and thanks for this time.
That's great. And people, feel free to reach out to David if you have further thoughts. We will organize at some point a session with David, but it's thank you again for coming. It was great.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everyone.
And I'll see you soon. I'll reach out for another meeting and then we'll be talking.
Sounds good. Okay, bye.
Ciao. Take care.